Please, help me. The desperate voice cracked the silence of the night raw and broken like the last breath of a man clinging to life. Jonas Keene froze on the porch of his cabin, his chest tightening as the sound cut through the cold. At his side, Atlas, the German shepherd, raised his ears while Luna the Husky let out a low growl. Something was wrong. Something was close. Jonas was no stranger to suffering. A veteran who had given his youth to a war that left him with scars no medicine could heal, he had chosen solitude over the noise of the world. The townspeople saw him as a ghost, a man who had already buried too much. His only companions were Atlas and Luna, two loyal creatures who had seen his worst nights and stood guard over his fragile peace. Yet now that peace was being torn apart by a stranger's cry for help. The air was sharp, the kind that burned the lungs with every breath. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Jonas knew that no one should be out there, not at this hour, not in this place. Whoever was calling to him was either running from death or dragging it behind them. And the pounding in Jonas's chest told him that opening his door might invite it straight into his life. But what secret could lie in a single voice, crying in the night? Who was out there, victim or trap, friend or foe? Atlas barked once, sharp as a command, as if urging Jonas to decide. Jonas stepped down into the darkness, not knowing that this moment was only the beginning. The cry for help was just the first crack in a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew. Jonas Keene did not move at first. The echo of that cry clung to the air as though it had been carved into the very night. His breath clouded in front of him, his hand tightening around the worn railing of the porch. The wood groaned under his grip, weathered by years of storms, sun, and silence. He had built this cabin with his own hands, each plank a way of keeping the outside world at bay, each nail hammered to drown out memories that still bled into his sleep. Yet the world, it seemed, had a way of finding him, no matter how deep into the wilderness he tried to hide. Atlas shifted closer to him, pressing his strong body against Jonas's leg. The German shepherd's amber eyes scanned the tree line, his ears flicking at every sound. Luna circled once at the foot of the steps, her silver coat glimmering faintly under the moonlight, her breath forming a halo of frost. Both dogs waited for their master's decision. Jonas could hear the tension in their bodies, feel the weight of their loyalty pressing against his solitude. He was not truly alone, though it often felt that way. Jonas had come to this place 3 miles from the nearest town at the edge of the Rockies because the silence promised peace. The town of Ashford Valley was small, a scattering of houses pressed together around a single church steeple and a faded general store. Its people were polite enough, but carried the wary distance they reserved for outsiders, especially those who returned from war with eyes too hollow and a heart too scarred to fit back into ordinary life. Jonas had learned quickly that they offered charity in public, but suspicion in private. He had caught the way they looked at him, as if he were a reminder of something they did not want to confront, a shadow of violence walking among them. He had once worn the uniform with pride, believing in duty, believing in the voices that said sacrifice was honor. But duty had left him bleeding in desert sands while men he trusted turned their backs. It had left him carrying home coffins of friends, their silence heavier than any battlefield. When the medals were pinned to his chest, they felt like chains. When the townsfolk offered thanks for his service, their words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play they did not believe in. So he chose the wilderness, where the trees did not ask questions, where the wind did not pretend gratitude. Atlas and Luna had been enough company, but the cry tonight pierced that fragile equilibrium. It was not the sound of an animal. It was human, raw, with suffering desperate enough to shatter the barriers Jonas had built around his heart. He knew that ignoring it would be easier, that he could retreat into the warmth of the cabin, bolt the door, and tell himself that the night would swallow whatever stranger had stumbled into his woods. But something in that voice, something that reminded him of soldiers whispering their last words, demanded he listen. He stepped down from the porch. The snow crunched beneath his boots, brittle under the weight of a winter that had only just begun its reign. The night smelled of pine and smoke, the remnants of his fire drifting lazily from the chimney. Above the stars were clear, sharp, uncaring. Jonas tightened his coat and gestured silently. Atlas moved to his left side, Luna to his right. The three of them forming a formation born not of training, but of instinct and trust. The forest loomed its shadows deep and tangled. Jonas moved cautiously, his breath steady, his ears straining for any sign of movement. The cry had come from beyond the ridge, where the old trail wound toward a forgotten mining camp. He had walked there before in the daylight, a path scattered with rusting machinery and broken carts, relics of men who had once believed the mountain would give them gold. But at night that place held only silence, and silence often hid danger. With each step, Jonas felt the weight of memory pressing closer. Nights on patrol in a desert half a world away, the sudden crack of gunfire, the cries of men calling for medics, for mothers, for God, the bitter knowledge that no amount of courage could answer them all. He shook his head, focusing on the present, but the ghosts followed regardless. Atlas barked once low and short, pulling him back. Jonas crouched, his hand brushing over the dog's strong back. Luna's eyes glimmered in the darkness, fixed on something ahead. There, against the pale shimmer of snow, a shape lay crumpled. At first Jonas thought it might be a discarded bundle, a pile of rags left behind by some drifter. But then it moved, a twitch of a hand, a ragged breath spilling into the air. The cry came again, weaker, this time a thread of sound unraveling into silence. Jonas felt the knot in his chest tighten. He approached slowly, Atlas and Luna flanking him with cautious steps. The man on the ground was middle-aged, his clothes torn and stained with blood. His face was pale, gaunt, the skin stretched thin, as if hunger had already claimed most of him. Jonas knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse was there, but faint, fluttering like a candle in the wind. The man's lips moved, forming words Jonas struggled to catch. Finally the stranger managed a whisper. "They're coming. Don't let them. Find it." Jonas froze. The words were too familiar, too much like the kind of last messages he had heard on battlefields. He looked around, his instincts sharpening. The forest was silent, but silence could be a mask. He wanted to demand answers, but the man's eyes rolled back, his body shuddering with another wave of pain. For a moment Jonas considered leaving him there, considered turning away from the burden that was about to settle on his shoulders. He had done his time, carried more weight than most men could bear. He owed nothing to this stranger. But as Atlas nudged the man's arm with his nose and Luna curled protectively near his side, Jonas knew he could not walk away. He had seen too many die alone. He would not add another to that number. He pulled off his coat, wrapping it around the man to hold in what warmth he could. The blood on his shirt was sticky, spreading slowly from a wound Jonas could not yet see in the darkness. He needed to move him, get him back to the cabin, find a way to stop the bleeding. He glanced at Atlas and Luna. "Guard," he whispered. Both dogs stiffened their ears, pricking their bodies tense. They would alert him to anything approaching. Lifting the stranger was like carrying dead weight, a reminder of comrades he had dragged from the field. The man groaned faintly, but did not resist. Jonas shifted him over his shoulder, his muscles burning with the effort, the old scars in his back flaring with pain. The snow crunched louder under the added burden as he turned back toward the cabin. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness, as though the night itself were listening. By the time he reached the porch again, his breath was ragged sweat, chilling on his skin despite the cold. He lowered the man onto the old cot by the fire, stoking the flames until the room glowed with a dim flickering light. The stranger shivered, his hands clutching at invisible threats, his eyes half open but unfocused. Jonas tore strips from an old sheet, pressing them against the wound in his side. Blood seeped through, instantly dark and stubborn. As Jonas worked, the stranger muttered incoherently, fragments of words spilling from his lips. "Hidden? They can't know. Atlas. Luna." Jonas stiffened at the mention of his dog's names. The man's gaze flicked toward them as though he already knew them, as though their presence was no accident. Jonas swallowed hard, a chill running deeper than the winter air. Who was this man, and what had he carried into Jonas's quiet exile? The cry for help had already torn open the silence he had fought so hard to preserve. Now the stranger's words hinted at something larger, something dangerous enough that others might already be on their way. Jonas looked at Atlas, then at Luna. The dogs met his gaze with unspoken trust, waiting for his next move. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint crunch of footsteps in the snow. Jonas's hand instinctively reached for the old rifle leaning by the door. His heart pounded, not just with the rhythm of survival, but with the heavy knowledge that his world of solitude had ended the moment he stepped off that porch. Whatever was coming would not just test his strength, but tear at every scar he carried, every truth he had tried to bury. And still, he knew this was only the beginning. The cabin was heavy, with the scent of blood and wood smoke, a mix that pulled Jonas back into memories he had tried to lock away. He pressed harder on the man's wound, watching crimson seep through the makeshift bandages, refusing to surrender. The stranger's breaths were shallow, erratic, like a drowning man gasping for air that refused to fill his lungs. Jonas had seen this before too many times. Each life slipping away carried with it the echo of promises never kept. He gritted his teeth, determined not to let another ghost haunt him tonight. But determination alone could not stop the storm building outside his walls. Atlas growled low, a rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Luna paced near the door hackles, raised her silver fur bristling. Jonas followed their gaze. Beyond the window, faint shadows moved across the snow. Whoever the dying man had feared was not far behind. The cry for help had been more than desperation. It had been a warning, a spark that lit a fuse. Jonas had no choice but to follow. He cursed under his breath, his heart pounding with an ache that was not just fear but anger at being pulled back into a world he had fled. He had given everything once: blood, loyalty, trust. In return, he had been abandoned, left broken, in a land that called him expendable. The faces of men who had turned their backs on him in the desert burned through his thoughts. Those same faces seemed to blur into the shadows outside his cabin now. He wondered bitterly if fate was determined to make him fight battles long after the war was over. The man on the cot stirred his voice, a raspy whisper. They'll kill you too, if you keep it. His hand twitched, grasping at the air, until Jonas caught it in his own, steady and firm. What did they do to you, Jonas? Demanded his voice, a mixture of fury and urgency. But the man's eyes fluttered shut again, his chest heaving with effort, the answer trapped in a mind drifting toward the dark. Jonas wanted to shake him, to force the truth free, but the weight of his fragility stopped him. Instead, Jonas turned his fury inward. How many times had he stood in this exact place, trying to save a life no one else would fight for, bearing burdens others refused to carry? Too many, and every time, it had left another scar. The knock came suddenly, not gentle but violent, rattling the door on its hinges. Jonas froze, rifle in hand, his finger brushing the trigger. Atlas barked sharp and loud, while Luna growled, her body rigid as a drawn bow. The voice outside was cold, controlled, dripping with menace. We know he's in there. Hand him over and we'll leave you in peace. Peace. The word felt like an insult, a mockery, hurled at a man who had been denied it for years. Jonas's grip tightened on the rifle, his body trembling with the weight of choices he thought he had left behind. He could hand over the stranger, close the door, and return to his exile. Or he could resist and once again become the soldier the world had forced him to be. He glanced at the man on the cot, barely clinging to life, and then at Atlas and Luna, their eyes locked on his, as though waiting for his command. His dogs would follow him into any hell he chose. That trust cut deeper than any weapon. Jonas knew what he had to do, even as dread coiled like barbed wire around his chest. He moved to the door and spoke through the wood, his voice steady, despite the fire burning inside him. This man is hurt. He's not going anywhere. The silence on the other side stretched long enough to make the hairs on Jonas's neck rise. Then the reply came, harsher, dripping with threat. Then you die with him. The first blow against the door shook the cabin, dust falling from the rafters. Jonas braced himself, the rifle pressed to his shoulder. Atlas crouched low and ready, Luna poised near the window. He could hear footsteps crunching through the snow, more than one circling like wolves. His heart hammered with the rhythm of old battles. He thought of the comrades he had lost, of the betrayal that had carved a hollow place in him, of the silence he had wrapped around his life like armor. And now that silence was breaking. The door splintered, a crack racing down its frame. Jonas fired once, the sound deafening in the small room. A shadow outside fell with a cry, but more pressed forward. Atlas lunged as the door gave way, teeth flashing, his growl exploding into the night. Luna darted through the side, launching at a man trying to slip through the window, her body a blur of silver fury. Jonas fought with a precision carved into him by years of survival, his body moving, even as his mind screamed against the return of violence. It was chaos. Shouts filled the cabin, boots thundering against wood steel, clashing against teeth and bone. Jonas's arms burned, his lungs seared, his body screamed with the memory of wounds that had never truly healed. But he fought not for medals, not for orders, not for a country that had abandoned him. He fought because he refused to betray the man on the cot, refused to betray the loyalty of Atlas, and Luna refused to betray himself again. At last, the attackers fell back, dragging their wounded, retreating into the shadows of the trees. The night was still again, broken only by the ragged breaths of man and dogs. Jonas lowered the rifle, his hands trembling, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold. He sank against the wall, his body aching, his mind heavier than stone. Atlas limped to his side, blood streaking his fur, while Luna's breath came fast, her eyes still burning with defiance. Jonas touched them both, whispering hoarsely, "Good, good dogs." But victory brought no relief. He looked at the stranger on the cot, the man whose cry had shattered the silence, and realized the cost of answering it. Blood had been spilled again, and the shadows outside would not stop until their mission was complete. Jonas felt the crushing weight of inevitability settle over him. He had taken a step back into the world he had abandoned, and there was no undoing it now. The stranger stirred once more, his voice weaker yet more desperate. You have to finish it. They'll never stop, not until." His words trailed off, his eyes rolling back, his body collapsing into unconsciousness. Jonas gripped his arm, shaking him, but there was no response, only silence, heavy and absolute. Jonas sat back, the firelight flickering across his scarred face, the rifle across his knees. Atlas and Luna pressed against his sides. He thought of the question that had hung since the first cry pierced the night, what had led to this moment. Now, with the cabin walls cracked and blood on the floor, the answer was clearer. The man's suffering, his flight, his desperate plea, it had all been born from betrayal, from enemies who thrived in silence, from a system that swallowed the weak and discarded them like husks. Jonas understood it too well. He had lived it. Abandoned on a battlefield, forgotten by the people who had promised to honor his sacrifice, left to build a life from ruins. And now fate had delivered another broken man to his door. Another reminder that injustice traveled farther than wars, that cruelty seeped even into the quietest corners of the earth. The question was no longer what had caused the cry for help, but what Jonas would do with it. Would he let this stranger's pain join the chorus of ghosts in his memory, or would he fight one more time, not because he was ordered to, but because he chose to? He looked at Atlas, who met his gaze with unwavering trust, and at Luna, whose eyes shone like ice and fire. His answer came without words. Outside, the night pressed close again, heavy with threats unseen. Jonas knew this was far from over. The real struggle had only just begun. The night would not release him. Even after the attackers pulled back into the forest, Jonas knew they had not vanished. Predators never surrendered so easily. They were regrouping, waiting, sharpening their knives for the next strike. The cabin walls felt thinner with every passing second, the air heavier, the silence sharper. Jonas's body ached from the fight, his scars burning as if they had been reopened. But it was not the pain that consumed him. It was the certainty that the storm outside was not finished with him. Atlas shifted uneasily, limping despite the blood drying on his fur. Luna prowled near the windows, her breaths visible in the cold drafts seeping through the cracks. They were restless, sensing what Jonas already knew: the danger had only grown. The man on the cot stirred again, his lips cracked and trembling, his words spilling out like fragments of broken glass. "It's hidden. The truth. They'll kill us all if it's found." Jonas bent closer, gripping the man's shoulder, forcing him to stay anchored in the waking world. What truth? What's hidden? Why are they here? But the man's eyes rolled back, his body arching with pain before collapsing into silence. For a moment Jonas thought he was gone, another soul claimed by the merciless night. But the faint rise and fall of his chest told otherwise. Barely alive, yet alive enough to tether Jonas to this unwanted mission. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint murmur of voices. They were closer now, emboldened, their patience running thin. Jonas's jaw tightened as he loaded the rifle with steady hands. He had been here before, cornered, outnumbered, the odds stacked against him. And every time he had survived, though the cost had been unbearable. He wondered if this night would finally be the one that demanded more than he could give. The knock came again, softer this time, like the tapping of death's hand. A different voice followed, calm, smooth, calculated. "Jonas Keene, we know who you are. We know what you've lost. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Give us the man, and you can keep your silence. Keep your dogs. Keep your peace. Peace." The word struck him again, crueler than any weapon. They dangled it before him like a bone before a starving hound, knowing how desperately he had chased it. But peace, at the cost of betrayal, was no peace at all. Jonas felt the weight of Atlas leaning against him, the fire in Luna's eyes, and he knew the choice had already been made. He raised the rifle and fired through the window. Glass shattered, screams erupted, the night exploded into violence. Shadows, charged bullets tore through wood. The cabin shuddered with the fury of the assault. Jonas dove behind the overturned table, returning fire in calculated bursts. Atlas lunged at the first intruder to breach the door, his jaws locking onto flesh with a savage growl. Luna leapt at another, her body colliding with a man's chest, sending him sprawling into the firelight. It was war again. The room filled with smoke, blood, and the deafening roar of battle. Jonas fought with a precision born of necessity. Each movement deliberate. Each shot fueled by memories he had tried to bury. But there were too many. The walls shook, the door splintered further, and Jonas realized the truth he had been denying. There was no holding this ground. Not tonight. Not against this storm. He grabbed the stranger from the cot, slinging his frail body over his shoulder. "Atlas, Luna," he barked, his voice commanding, sharp. The dogs obeyed instantly, circling him as he pushed toward the back door. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood inches from his head. He kicked the door open, snow rushing in, the cold biting at his skin. They plunged into the night, the forest swallowing them whole. The snow was deep, slowing every step, each breath burning like fire in his lungs. Atlas darted ahead, clearing the path, while Luna flanked her, growls echoing into the darkness. Jonas stumbled under the weight of the stranger, but he pressed on, driven by the cry that had started it all. That voice was not just a plea anymore. It was a command, a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he refused to surrender. Behind them, torches flared, voices shouted, the hunters closing in. Jonas's heart hammered with the rhythm of pursuit. The stranger stirred weakly against his back, whispering words that chilled Jonas to the bone. "It's all written down. In the mine. They'll kill everyone if it's revealed. The mine. The abandoned camp at the ridge." Jonas's gut twisted with realization. Whatever this man carried, whatever truth he had stumbled upon, it was buried in that place of rust and shadows. And now Jonas, unwilling or not, was bound to it. The forest grew steeper, the path narrowing, the snow falling thicker. Jonas stumbled, his knees buckling, the stranger nearly slipping from his grasp. Atlas doubled back, barking furiously, urging him on. Luna pressed against his side, her body steadying him, her strength lending him what his own had lost. He forced himself forward, step by agonizing step, until the dark mouth of the mine loomed before them. He ducked inside, the cold replaced by damp silence, the air heavy with the scent of rot and iron. His flashlight flickered across the walls, revealing rusted tracks and broken beams. The mine was a tomb abandoned by men who had once believed it would bring them fortune. Now it promised only secrecy. Jonas laid the stranger down against the wall, his own chest heaving with exhaustion. The man's eyes fluttered open, wild and desperate. He clutched at Jonas's arm with surprising strength, dragging him close. "You can't let them take it. The ledger. Names, dates, every deal. They've sold people like cattle. They've bought silence with blood." His voice broke, tears streaking his dirt-stained face. "I tried to stop them. They made me run. They'll kill me for it. They'll kill you too." Jonas felt the ground shift beneath him, not from the mine but from the truth itself. A ledger of crimes, of lives traded like currency, buried here in the dark. The cry for help had not just been a man clinging to life. It had been a warning of rot, festering beneath the surface of the world, the same rot that had poisoned his own past. Before he could speak, footsteps echoed at the entrance of the mine. Torches, bobbed voices shouted their hunters had arrived. Jonas raised his rifle, his hand steady despite the storm inside him. Atlas and Luna flanked him, their growls reverberating off the stone walls, their eyes locked on the shadows advancing. There was no escape now. The mine was a trap, its walls closing and its darkness offering no exit. Jonas's heart pounded, the weight of every betrayal pressing down on him. He saw again the faces of comrades left behind, the promises broken, the silence of townsfolk who had looked away when he needed them most. And now here he was forced to fight again, forced to bleed again, forced to stand against a tide that seemed endless. The first torchlight pierced the dark, revealing masked faces, weapons raised, eyes cold. Jonas took a breath, steady and deep, his voice low but unyielding. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." The gunfire erupted, deafening in the confined space, sparks flying from stone and steel. Atlas leapt, Luna lunged, Jonas fired until the rifle clicked empty, then swung it like a club. Bodies clashed, blood spilled, the mine roared with the fury of desperation. Jonas fought with every shred of strength left in him, his muscles screaming, his vision blurring. The cry that had started it all echoed in his ears, not as weakness, but as a rallying call. A reminder that some battles were worth fighting even when the cost was everything. Atlas's snarl cut through the chaos, followed by a scream. Luna's body collided with another attacker, sending him crashing into the wall. Jonas drove his fist into a man's throat, the crack of bone echoing through the dark. But they kept coming, relentless, like shadows given flesh. Jonas felt his knees buckle, pain exploding across his side as a blade sliced deep. He staggered, his blood hot against the cold air. The stranger cried out from where he lay, his voice raw and terrified. "Don't let them take it, don't let them win." The words fueled Jonas like fire, dragging him back from the edge. He surged forward, slamming the rifle butt into an attacker's skull, his roar filling the mine. Atlas and Luna fought at his sides, their loyalty fierce and unbreakable, their bodies a shield between him and the abyss. But even as they fought, Jonas knew the truth: they could not hold forever. The mine would collapse under the weight of this storm. His only hope was to turn this trap into a weapon. His eyes darted to the cracked beams above the unstable rock, trembling with each explosion of gunfire. He made his choice. With one final cry, a sound that was part fury, part defiance, part liberation, Jonas fired into the supports. The mine groaned, the ceiling splitting, rocks crashing down like the wrath of the earth itself. Shouts of panic filled the air as attackers scattered their torches, falling into the darkness. Dust and stone engulfed the tunnel, choking the light, silencing the gunfire. When the echo faded, only the sound of Jonas's ragged breathing remained. He coughed, his body battered, his blood seeping into the cold ground. Atlas and Luna pressed against him, their fur coated with dust, their eyes shining with the fire of survival. The stranger whimpered softly, alive, but barely. The cry for help that had pierced the night had reached its climax, transformed into a clarion call that demanded Jonas confront not just the enemy outside, but the silence within himself. There was no turning back now. The truth buried in this mine would not stay hidden, and Jonas Keene, scarred and weary, had become its unwilling guardian. The night was far from over. The dust settled slowly, falling like a shroud over the wreckage. The mine groaned in protest, but for the moment it held. Jonas coughed against the grit in his lungs, each breath searing like fire, his body aching from wounds old and new. Atlas whined softly at his side, shaking debris from his coat, his amber eyes fixed on Jonas with worry. Luna pressed against his leg, her flank rising and falling with exhausted breaths, her silver fur streaked with blood that was not all her own. They were alive. Somehow, against the weight of stone and shadow, they had survived. Jonas leaned back against the wall, the rifle heavy in his hands, his vision blurred. Every muscle trembled with the memory of the fight. Every scar screamed as though torn open. But amid the wreckage, amid the silence, where enemy voices had once shouted, there was something else, something fragile, but unmistakable: hope. The stranger lay sprawled against the rocks, coughing weakly, his body frail and battered. Jonas crawled to him, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the faint rise and fall. Still breathing, against all odds, still clinging to life. Jonas ripped another strip from his shirt, binding the wound as best he could, his hands moving with the certainty of a man who had done this too many times before. The stranger's eyes flickered open, glazed but burning with desperate determination. "You stop them," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But they won't stop. Not until the truth is buried again." His fingers clutched at Jonas's sleeve, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. "The ledger, it's deeper in the mine. If it survives the collapse, it can end this. Names, dates, everything they've done." Jonas's heart tightened. He had not asked for this. He had not sought the burden of another war. Yet here it was pressed into his hands like a brand he could not refuse. The cry for help that had shattered his silence was no longer just about one man's survival. It was about the lives of countless others, faceless and voiceless, traded like goods, while the world looked away. Atlas nudged the stranger's arm, his warm breath a reassurance. Luna stood guard, her body tense, as though ready to face another assault. Jonas drew in a slow breath, his decision forming not from duty, not from obligation, but from the quiet fire that still burned beneath all his scars. He would see this through, not because anyone ordered him to, not because he owed the world another ounce of blood, but because to walk away now would mean betraying the cry that had called to him, betraying the very core of what it meant to still be alive. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying with exhaustion, and looked deeper into the mine. The beams groaned, dust raining down with every shift of rock. Going further could mean death, yet the stranger's words hung heavy in the air, heavier than the mountain itself. Somewhere within that labyrinth of stone lay a ledger that could expose everything that could tear down the walls built by corruption and silence. Jonas tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. Step by step he moved deeper, Atlas and Luna following without hesitation. The stranger's shallow breaths echoed faintly behind him, tethering Jonas to the weight of what he carried. The tunnel narrowed the darkness, pressing closer, but Jonas pressed on the beam of his flashlight, cutting through the gloom. At last he reached a chamber half collapsed, the remnants of wooden crates scattered across the floor. Amid the debris, something glimmered faintly beneath a slab of fallen rock. Jonas knelt, his hands digging through splintered wood and jagged stone, until he uncovered a leather-bound book, its cover worn, its pages yellowed but intact. He opened it with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning the ink that had not yet faded. Names, numbers, transactions. Each line a record of betrayal of human lives, bought and sold like livestock. Each page a weapon sharper than any blade. His chest tightened, rage surging through him like fire. The stranger had not lied. This was the truth. They had tried to bury the truth that had sent men clawing into the night to silence a dying man. Jonas closed the ledger and held it against his chest, the weight of it heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. For the first time in years, he felt not just the burden of survival, but the spark of purpose. He returned to the stranger, who opened his eyes, weakly relief. flooding his expression at the sight of the book. "You found it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Now, you have to decide. Expose it, or burn with it. They won't stop hunting you if you choose to fight." His breath rattled a harsh sound in the stillness. "But if you stay silent, nothing changes. They win." Jonas's gaze shifted to Atlas and Luna, their loyal eyes reflecting the firelight. His dogs had never left him, had never betrayed him, had never turned away when the world had. They waited now as if they too knew the choice before him. For years he had sought silence, believing it was the only refuge left. But silence had never healed him. Silence had never saved anyone. Silence was the language of betrayal, of abandonment, of injustice left unchecked. He placed a hand on the stranger's shoulder, his voice low but steady. "Rest, now. You're safe, for the moment." The man's eyes fluttered shut, his breath shallow, but steady enough to hold. Jonas knew time was short. They needed to leave the mine before it became their tomb. With the ledger secured inside his coat, Jonas lifted the man once more, his muscles screaming in protest. Atlas padded ahead, his ears alert, guiding them through the dark. Luna stayed close, her body brushing against Jonas's leg, as if to lend him her strength. They emerged into the night, the cold air hitting like a wave, the stars scattered above in silent witness. For the first time since the cry had pierced the night, Jonas allowed himself a breath that did not feel like drowning. They had survived. They had found something worth fighting for. Yet even as that fragile thread of hope wove itself through his chest, doubt crept in with it. The ledger was power, yes, but power was dangerous. Exposing it could bring justice, or it could unleash chaos. It could save lives, or it could end them. As Jonas laid the stranger gently on the snow, covering him with the remnants of his coat, he lifted his gaze to the horizon. The town lay miles away, its lights faint in the distance. A cluster of warmth and suspicion. If he brought the ledger there, would they believe him? Or would they hand him over to the very men he had fought in the mine he could not know? Atlas pressed against his leg, Luna licked his hand, and Jonas felt the weight of their trust steady him. For now, that was enough. He would not decide tonight, not with blood still fresh on his hands, not with the echoes of the battle still ringing in his ears. Tonight was for survival. Tomorrow would be for choices. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of movement. Jonas's hand tightened on his rifle. He knew the fight was far from over. The mine had bought them time, nothing more. The men who had come would return, and when they did, they would not come quietly. But as he stood there, battered yet unbroken, the ledger pressed against his heart. Jonas felt something he had not felt in years, the beginning of a reason to keep moving forward. The cry for help had been more than a plea. It had been a call to arms, a reminder that silence was no longer an option. And yet, as the snow fell heavier and the forest closed around them, one question lingered like a shadow too dark to ignore. Was this truly the beginning of redemption, or had he only stepped into a greater tragedy? Atlas barked once, sharp and certain. Luna's howl rose into the night, long and haunting, carrying far beyond the trees. Jonas listened, his chest tight, his mind heavy with choices yet to come. Then he turned toward the horizon, his steps slow but resolute. The night was not finished with him. The world was not finished with him. And whatever came next, Jonas Keene knew there was no going back to silence. The story was only beginning. The night that began with a desperate cry had unraveled Jonas Keene's silence, shattering the walls he had built to keep the world away. In the space of hours, he had gone from a man clinging to isolation to the unwilling bearer of a truth powerful enough to ignite chaos. He had fought in the shadows of his cabin, bled in the depths of a collapsing mine, and carried both a dying man and the weight of a ledger that whispered of unspeakable betrayal. Beside him, Atlas and Luna had stood as more than dogs. They had been his guardians, his companions, his proof that loyalty could survive even when the world abandoned everything else. The cry for help that first echoed in the night had grown into something larger, a call that demanded not only his strength, but his choice. Jonas had answered with grit, with defiance, and with a courage he thought he had buried in desert sands long ago. Yet the fight was far from over. The enemy had only been pushed back, not defeated. The ledger he now carried was not an end, but a beginning. A fuse that once lit could never be extinguished. And that leaves us with the question, what comes next? Will Jonas risk everything to expose the names written in faded ink, knowing the hunters will return for him with even greater fury? Or will he choose silence once again, burying the truth, to preserve what little peace he has left? The choice is his. But in stories like these, choices have a way of burning brighter than fate itself. Now, it's your turn. If you were in Jonas's place alone, hunted carrying a secret that could change everything, what would you do? Would you reveal the truth no matter the cost? Or would you bury it to survive another day? Tell us in the comments below, because your voice matters in shaping how this story lives on. And if you want to know what waits for Jonas, Atlas, and Luna as they step into a world where silence is no longer an option, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Their journey is far from finished, and the next chapter will test them in ways even they cannot yet imagine. The cry for help was only the beginning.